We tell ourselves a comforting story, that we are the most advanced civilization that has ever stood on this earth, that every generation before us was a little more primitive, a little more in the dark, climbing slowly upward toward us, the peak, the smartest the species has ever been. The Book of Enoch says that story is a lie. It says there was a world before the flood that understood things we have still not rediscovered. A civilization that did not climb slowly toward knowledge over thousands of years the way we did. A civilization that was simply handed it, all at once, fully formed, by teachers who came down out of the sky. And it says something even harder to sit with, that the flood was not what you were taught it was. It was not just God losing patience with a wicked world. It was a containment, a deliberate drowning of a science that was never meant to be in human hands, knowledge so dangerous that the only way to stop it was to erase the entire civilization that held it and start the human race over from 8 people in a wooden box. Tonight I open the scroll and I read exactly what that forbidden science was, who taught it, and why heaven decided the whole world had to drown to bury it. And by the end you are going to understand why the same book swears it is coming back. Your Bible knows this happened. It just barely talks about it. In the 6th chapter of Genesis, right before the flood, there are a few strange verses that almost everyone reads straight past. It says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them as wives, and that there were giants in the earth in those days, mighty men of old, men of renown." And then, almost in the same breath, it says the wickedness of man had become great, and the earth was filled with violence, and that God regretted that he had made man at all. That is the whole hint. Sons of God, giants, violence filling the earth. And then the water. Genesis tells you the world got so corrupt it had to be destroyed, but it never tells you how. It does not explain what changed. What turned ordinary men into a civilization so violent and so corrupt that the Creator regretted creation itself? What was the engine of that corruption? The Book of Enoch is the book that answers the question Genesis leaves hanging in the air. Because Enoch does not say the sons of God merely came down and took wives. He says they came down and they taught, and he names them, and he lists, subject by subject, exactly what they opened up for mankind. Genesis gives you the crater. Enoch shows you the bomb. The book calls them the Watchers. 200 of them, Enoch says, beings of heaven, descended in the days of Jared onto the summit of Mount Hermon. They were led by one called Semjaza, and they bound themselves together with an oath to go through with what they had come to do. And the first thing the text tells you is that they took human wives, the part everyone remembers. But the part that actually destroyed the world is the part that comes next. They began to teach. Understand what that means. These were not human inventors slowly working things out over centuries with trial and error and failure. These were beings who already possessed the knowledge of heaven, the understanding of metal and medicine and the movements of the stars, and they simply handed it to mankind, fully formed, like pouring an ocean into a cup. Overnight, across the span of a single generation, the human race went from the simple world of early Genesis to a civilization armed with the finished sciences of heaven itself. And Enoch, unlike Genesis, takes you down the list of exactly what they taught. So let me read it to you the way he wrote it, one forbidden science at a time, and watch closely how modern each one of them sounds. The first teacher Enoch names is the one whose name ends up underneath everything, Azazel. Azazel, the text says, taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He taught them metallurgy. He taught them to pull the metals out of the earth and to work them in fire and to shape them into blades and into armor. Stop and picture what the world was before that lesson and what it became after it. Before Azazel, a quarrel between 2 men ended in fists and stones. After Azazel, mankind had the sword. It had the technology of killing, mass-produced, sharpened, worn on the body, and carried into the field. Enoch is telling you that the entire science of war, the forging of weapons that has not stopped evolving from that day to the missiles of right now, was not a slow human discovery. It was a download, a gift from a fallen teacher, handed to a species that immediately used it to drench the earth in blood, and your own Bible quietly confirms the timing. In the 4th chapter of Genesis, in the line of Cain, there is a man named Tubal-Cain, and Genesis calls him the forger of every cutting instrument of bronze and iron, the first metalworker named anywhere in Scripture. The same chapter says Cain built the first city, and that his descendants invented the harp and the pipe, the first instruments of music. The line of Cain is the Bible's own quiet record of the first technological civilization rising fast, exactly as Enoch describes in the generations before the flood. But Azazel did not stop at weapons. The same teacher, Enoch says, turned to the women, and he taught them a second science, the chemistry of the body and the manipulation of appearance. He taught them the working of precious stones and metals into ornaments. He taught them the use of antimony, a metal ground down into the dark paint they wore around their eyes. He taught them dyes and colorings, the chemistry of changing how a thing appears. He taught them, in the words of the text, the beautifying of the eyelids, and every art of adornment. It sounds small next to swords until you understand what Enoch is actually describing. He is describing the birth of chemistry applied to the human body, the grinding of minerals into pigment, the processing of stones and metals into something worn, the deliberate altering of appearance to deceive and to seduce. The text says, "This is the moment vanity and lust were weaponized, that the world filled with the chasing of the flesh, and that men were led astray by it." The first cosmetics were not a beauty trend. In Enoch, they are listed as a forbidden science, a chemistry of deception handed down from a fallen teacher, and it spread corruption through the world as surely as the swords did. Then comes the science that is hardest to translate cleanly, because the ancient world did not divide it the way we do. Pharmacology and sorcery, taught as one single art. Semjaza himself, the leader of them, taught what the text calls enchantments and the cutting of roots. Another, named Armoros, taught the resolving of enchantments. The cutting of roots is exactly what it sounds like. It is the harvesting of plants and roots for their hidden properties, the brewing of potions and drugs and medicines, the earliest pharmacology, and it is bound up in the very same breath with enchantment, with sorcery, with using these substances and these spoken words together to alter the mind, to bend the will, to reach for power over other people and over the unseen world. This is the science of the potion and the spell as a single thing, the drug that opens the door, and the incantation that walks through it. Enoch is telling you that the manipulation of the body's chemistry and the manipulation of the spirit were taught together by the same fallen beings as one forbidden art, and anyone who has watched the modern world rediscover the power of substances to crack open the human mind, and the way that always seems to come tangled up with something darker riding in behind it, should feel the hair rise at how ancient that exact combination really is. And then the Watchers lifted mankind's eyes off the ground and up to the sky, and taught the science that ties all the others together, the reading of the heavens. Enoch names these teachers one by one, and it reads like the faculty list of a university. Barakel taught astrology, Kokabel taught the constellations, the signs hidden in the stars, one named Sariel taught the course of the moon, Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, the reading of the weather itself, Arachiel taught the signs of the earth, Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Every gate of the sky and every turning of the seasons had a fallen teacher assigned to it. Between them they handed mankind a complete map of the cosmos, the movements of the sun and the moon and the stars, the turning of the seasons, the reading of the entire sky. Now part of this is what we would proudly call astronomy, the tracking of the heavens, the building of a calendar, the understanding of the year. But Enoch does not call it astronomy, he calls it astrology, and he lists it among the forbidden things, and that distinction is the whole point. The Watchers did not merely teach mankind to observe the sky, they taught mankind to read the sky for power, to believe that the stars governed fate, that the heavens could be decoded and harnessed, that a man who knew the signs could seize his own future. It was real cosmic knowledge welded to the oldest lie of all, that man could become his own god if he just had the right information. The most advanced science of the old world and the most spiritually poisonous turned out to be the very same lesson. Now lay it all out together, and you finally understand the title of what we are reading: Metallurgy and the Engineering of War. The chemistry of materials and of the body, pharmacology and the altering of the mind, astronomy and the mapping of the heavens. That is not the toolkit of a primitive world. That is the foundation of nearly every science we still practice today. And the Book of Enoch says the pre-flood world did not spend 10,000 years grinding its way up to that knowledge the slow way we did. It received it, whole and finished, in just a few generations, from teachers who already knew all of it. That is what it means to call that world more advanced than ours. Not only that they may have had wonders we have lost, though the old traditions do hint at exactly that. It means their knowledge raced far ahead of their wisdom and their readiness to hold it. We earned our science slowly, the hard way, and even climbing it slowly, it has nearly broken us more than once. They were handed theirs instantly by beings who wanted to see what the human race would do with power it had not grown into. And the answer the world gave was catastrophe. Enoch says the earth filled up with the results of every one of those lessons. The weapons filled it with blood, the sorcery filled it with corruption, and the giants, the monstrous children of the Watchers and the women, devoured everything the new sciences could produce and then turned their hunger on mankind itself. And the text says, the earth could not hold it any longer. The ground, soaked in blood and violence, lifted up a voice. The earth itself began to cry out to heaven, and heaven heard it. And the forbidden science did not only produce weapons and potions and charts, it produced a living thing. Because the Watchers had not only taught, they had bred. Their children with the daughters of men were the giants, the Nephilim, and Enoch describes them in a way that turns the stomach. He says they grew to an enormous size, and that they consumed everything the new world could produce. They ate the grain and the herds and the entire harvest of all the labor of men until there was nothing left to hand them. And when the food finally ran out, the text says they turned on mankind itself and devoured the people, and then began to consume one another and to drink the blood. Read that as the most honest line in the whole account. A civilization that reaches for power it has not earned does not simply build dangerous tools. It breeds something it cannot feed and cannot control, something that eats everything around it and at last turns and eats its own makers. The giants were the forbidden science made flesh. They were what happens when the appetite of a world grows larger than the world that has to feed it, and their endless hunger, Enoch says, was one of the loudest voices in the cry that finally rose up to heaven. The most advanced world that had ever been built had become a slaughterhouse, and it had done it in only a handful of generations. So now the flood looks like something completely different than the gentle story with the animals and the rainbow. You were taught that God flooded the world because the people were sinful. That is true, but it is so vague that it hides the real horror underneath it. Enoch tells you the specific thing that had actually gone wrong. A species had been handed sciences it was never meant to possess by beings who had abandoned heaven to give them away. The knowledge was loose in the world. It was breeding. It was being written down and passed on and built upon, one generation feeding it to the next, and there was no putting it back in the box. The flood, read this way, was not an outburst of rage. It was containment. It was heaven making the only move that could actually stop what was happening. You cannot take a science back once it is in the world. You cannot recall a weapon once it is forged, or a poison once it is brewed, or a secret once it is taught. The only way to truly bury the forbidden knowledge was to erase the civilization carrying it. Every library, every workshop, every teacher and student of it, all the way down to the waterline, and to spare only one single family that had kept itself clear of it. The flood was a hard reset, a deletion of an entire advanced world, performed to keep its science from going one step further. And Enoch tells you what happened to the teachers themselves. The Watchers were bound. And Azazel, the one who started all of it with the swords and the chemistry, was handed a sentence of his own. The text says he was bound hand and foot and thrown into the darkness, into a jagged opening in the desert, to lie there in the broken rocks until the day of judgment. And then it says something staggering about him. It says the whole earth was corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel, and to him heaven ascribed all sin, all of it. The one who handed mankind the forbidden science was named by heaven as the root of the ruin of the entire world. But here is where the story turns, and where the name of this channel earns itself. If the entire purpose of the flood was to bury the forbidden science, then there is one obvious question that nobody wants to ask out loud. Did it work? Did all of it actually drown? The traditions say no. There is an old account preserved by the historian Josephus that the people of the godly line, knowing a destruction was coming, took everything they had learned about the heavens and the order of the world and carved it onto two great pillars, one of brick and one of stone, so that the knowledge would survive whatever judgment arrived, whether by water or by fire. Pillars built for the single purpose of carrying the old knowledge across the flood to the other side. Whether or not those pillars were ever real, the existence of the legend tells you something on its own. The ancient world believed the forbidden knowledge was far too valuable to let die, and believed that someone made certain a copy of it survived the water. And the Book of Enoch itself carries the deeper warning, because Enoch never presents the forbidden science as a thing that is safely gone. He presents it as a thing sealed, bound, and waiting. Azazel is not destroyed. He is chained in a desert pit until the day of judgment. The knowledge is not erased out of existence. It is buried, and buried things, on this channel, have a way of clawing back up to the surface. Enoch warned that in the last days, the sealed things would be opened again. That knowledge hidden away since before the flood would come back to a generation standing at the very end. Heaven drowned an entire world to bury this science one time. The book says it does not stay buried. So here is what the old world actually was. Not a cave of primitives slowly chipping out the wheel. A civilization handed the keys to metal, to medicine, to chemistry, and to the heavens by teachers who came down from the sky and were never supposed to give any of it away. A world that became more advanced than its own wisdom could survive, that filled the earth with weapons and sorcery and monsters until the ground itself screamed, and that heaven chose to drown completely, not out of temper, but to contain a knowledge that could not be allowed to keep spreading. The flood was the lid slammed down on the most dangerous science the human race has ever held, and one name sits underneath all of it: the first teacher, the one heaven blamed for the ruin of the entire world, the one who handed us the sword and the chemistry of deception and was chained in a desert pit to wait. Azazel. Enoch says he is still down there, still bound, still waiting for the day the seals come off. That is the next scroll I open. Because the same book that tells you the forbidden science was buried under the flood also lays out the exact terms of the day it comes back, the day Azazel is dragged out of the dark to answer for every bit of it and what gets unsealed when he is. And it is not a comfort. So if you understood tonight that we may not be the first advanced world and that the most dangerous knowledge we hold was maybe never ours to begin with, leave one word in the comments. Leave the name heaven placed at the root of all of it. Leave the word Azazel. Subscribe to the Buried Testament and stay close, because we just drowned one whole world to bury this, and the book swears it is digging its way back.